an interactive residency by myself and Anna. It takes its initial inspiration from the history of the Leigh Female Reformers of 1819 and the monstrous representations of them in the media of the time. So we're drawing on this symbolism and elements of the Reformers' activities. We're researching and developing work with the Leigh community, which weaves a new empowering language based on the shared history of place, myth, power and witchcraft. So we were transforming the Turnpike into an enchanted forest ripe for conspiracy, filled with monstrous banners designed and made by the community. This magical space will be added to throughout our residency with art made by the community and by ourselves. So we'll be running online workshops and creative activities which connect people with their history through materials and making. And during lockdown, we're developing our own work at home. So this would have been in residency at the Turnpike, but obviously we're just adapting to that at the moment. Our project is a way to engender citizenry and is evolving through participant interaction and creation. A programme of more online talks, performances, and later a history walk will further explore the sites and history of the Reformers and the spectral power in an enfranchised populace. So that's just to whet your palate a little bit about our project. So we're going to introduce Yvonne Eckersley, an historian who is interested in researching local history, and in particular the working class and female political history. Her research and articles have focused on local women's involvement in women's suffrage, for example, Thorley Smith's campaign as women's suffrage candidate in Wigan, trade unionism, Wigan weavers' involvement in politics, and the growth of the labour movement in Wigan. So Yvonne has been integral in helping us with our archive research, which we did along with members of the public. We are delighted that Yvonne is here to talk to us today about the Leigh Female Reform Union, its origins and its actions. So I'm going to pass over to Yvonne.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Helen. I'll go straight into it. I'm reading it, so I might be not looking at you. I'll start with a very brief interview of what has gone down in history as the Peterloo Massacre, before going on to describe the Leigh Reform meeting of the 11th of August 1819, during which I'll concentrate on a section of society of which very little is known, namely the working class women of our area. And to do this, I will focus on the actions of the Leigh women, why they may have acted this way, how they and their actions were perceived at the time, and the lasting legacy of their actions. On the 16th of August 1819, 60,000 men, women and children from villages and towns within walking distance of Manchester went to listen to the well-known radical Henry Hunt speak on political reform. According to John Cooke of Leigh, scores went to Manchester from our area. On the day, alarmed local magistrates ordered the arrest of Hunt, read the Riot Act, and the military dispersed the crowd. Can we have image 1, please? There you are. And that's, as you can see, a print of the Peterloo Massacre published by Richard Carlile in 1819. And you can see the women up there in their white dresses and the cavalry slashing to the left and to the right. Thank you. Here we are. Something that was brutally done. Within half an hour, at least 15 people were fatally injured, and many more were bludgeoned, sabred, trampled under horses' hooves, or crushed. Over 600 needed medical treatment, including five local men. But Peterloo didn't happen in a vacuum. It was not a spontaneous flash in the pan. It had antecedents. And one of these was the Reform meeting in Leigh. On the 26th of July, a number of leading Leigh radicals went to ask the permission of Leigh Magistrate Richard Marsh to hold a public meeting in Leeds Marketplace on the 11th of August, just 5 days before the notorious Peterloo meeting. The reason they gave for the meeting was to discuss and adopt a constitutional and practical remedy for reforming Parliament and avoiding the current distress. The day before the meeting, Marsh met magistrates from Bolton and Warrington at Hulton Park, the home of one of the Peterloo one of the magistrates at the Peterloo meeting. There they discussed tactics for handling the Leigh meetings at which Henry Hunt was expected to speak. Bolton Magistrate Ralph Fletcher expressed the opinion that it ought to be suppressed. Then, by referring to Leigh's Female Reform Union, he identified them as a serious threat, as they were planning to act a conspicuous part by addressing the meeting from the hustings and presenting a cap of liberty. Now this begs the question, what made Fletcher think Leigh's women were a threat to the established order? Well, after the war with revolutionary France had been declared, the British government was afraid that revolutionaries were secretly planning an English revolution. In an effort to identify potential revolutionary groups, the government passed the Friendly Societies Act in 1793. And this act required all groups and societies to register with local magistrates. In Leigh at that time, a large number of working class women had organised themselves into self-help societies in order to stave off destitution, and they had to register. Fortunately, in the archives in Leigh Town Hall, 84 membership certificates for registered female friendly societies in and around Leigh have been preserved. Now, looking at these, we can see how, in order to exist, these societies exploited the perceptions of womanhood common at that time. Now, the women were very careful to deflect any suggestion that their societies were anything other than groups of harmless women gathering together in social groups with the sole aim of supporting women in times of need. And one important strategy they used to that end was the deliberate choice of passive, friendly, and even words with moral connotations when naming their societies. Hence, the Amiable Female Friendly Society, the Amicable Female Friendly Society, the Female Society, the Female Social Society, Sale Lane Female Society, the Union Female Society, the Virtuous Female Society, and Bedford Sick Club. Yet all was not as it seemed. The women of these societies would have been independent, assertive, and highly organised. Each society would have secretaries to complete the required legal paperwork, treasurers to collect and record member subscriptions, pay money to women in need, and balance the book. A committee to call and run the meetings at which women would, in all likelihood, have discussed the existence and causes of their poverty. Female stewards who, given status and power differentials, would have needed confidence and courage to swear in new members in front of local church wardens, overseers, and magistrates. Now, it is possible, especially as friendly societies were often fronts for trade union or radical activity, that these societies may have been home to some female radicals. In 1804, Leigh radical Henry Battersby was witness to the Amicable Female Friendly Society's stewards, Mary Dowell and Betty Adamson, as they swore in a new member, Mary Croft, at the Cock Inn in Pennington. So getting back to Fletcher for a moment, perhaps he saw through their subterfuge. But not all women, Leigh's women, were members of friendly societies, but by 1819, all would have experienced, or at least been aware of, the conditions in which many of the town's inhabitants lived. They would have been aware of, or shared, a rising sense of the injustice of a system that perpetrated that suffering. And they would also have been aware of the arguments formulated by Leigh's political activists to alleviate the distress, and the government's response. On the 11th of August, thousands of supporters of reform from the towns and villages surrounding Leigh marched with music and banners into Marketplace. Can we have image 2, please? Can we have image 2, please?
Can I just say, Yvonne, is your volume up fully? Like, I think a couple of people are saying that they're struggling to hear a little bit. So just wanted to...
I do have a soft voice. I will speak up.
Okay.
Go back.
Okay. No, it's okay. I just thought I'll just take that opportunity to just check your volume's up full. I think a lot of people are fine, but some people are struggling.
Yeah, sorry.
No, it's okay.
So this is Leigh Marketplace. It's a painting, obviously, and it's idealised. But it's the nearest we've got in the archives to showing the buildings that would have been there in Georgian England. Okay, I'll move on now. So this is the meeting. It wasn't a mass demonstration of aggressive force, nor an attempt by workers to improve their wages. It was a highly organised meeting designed to get support for a political solution for economic ills. The organisers were aware of the opposition they faced. Magistrates were watching, and they had the power and will to forcibly break up the meeting. Hence, Henry Battersby stressed from the outset that the meeting remained peaceful. On the day of the meeting, Leigh's Female Reform Union had met Battersby and fellow radicals to finalise details of their participation. It was in a carefully controlled and dramatic way that the women joined the meeting. Once the crowd had assembled, Henry Battersby deliberately drew their attention to the procession of the female reformers as they walked into Marketplace. In an impressive show of unity, wearing white dresses with black sashes, carrying their own banners, presenting the main political messages of the reform movement: no corn laws, annual parliaments, universal suffrage, and, confrontationally, a cap of liberty. In this way, they identified themselves as political women. And their status was recognised. Their committee of 12 had been reserved seats on the platform, and to the sound of 9 rousing cheers, they climbed the steps and took their places. Mr. Bamber, the chairman, read the Leigh's 10 resolutions. Then Thomas Cleworth read the Leigh Female Reform Union's address. And this stressed the women's defiance that at any suggestion they are not to be politically active, but to stay at home, that they would not be passive bystanders, and they would rather not go home to see their children hungry. Henry Battersby then spoke in praise of Leigh's radical women. He began by explaining the symbolism of the cap of liberty, acknowledged the heroic and determined spirit which motivated the women to act, and stressed their long-term role in the success of the reform movement, particularly in the socialisation of future generations. Interestingly, it was at this point, on the order of Ralph Fletcher, police constables interrupted the meeting by arresting Thomas Cleworth. Hussars took Cleworth to Wigan Jail and then on to Tower Prison. A man named Stirrup was also arrested because, as publican of the Cross Keys pub, he was treasurer of a penny subscription club to the radical newspaper, the Manchester Observer. After the arrests, a report to Lord Sidmouth at the Home Office claim the leaders left the platform and the meeting began to disintegrate. However, contemporary press reports differed significantly. They reported that a female reformer had held the meeting together. And this would have been Marjorie Dean, the president of Leigh's Female Reform Union, to whom Mr. Bamber gave up the chair. In this way, Leigh's female reformers, by keeping their head in a crisis and taking over the male reformers' leadership of that meeting, confused the magistrate's perception of the natural characteristics of men and women. And in doing so, they demonstrated their potential power to challenge authorities' attempts to suppress not just the Leigh meeting, but the reform movement itself. Perhaps it was with this in mind that Charles Wrigley, reporting to the Home Office, complained that these Lancashire women are witches in politics. Witness James Norris told Lord Sidmouth that the presence and actions of the women there were remarkable and novel. However, female reform unions had more than novelty value. Each union was committed to reform, had their own leaders, committees, speakers, organisation, shared dress code, and networks locally and regionally. Furthermore, they had influence within their families as wives, sisters, daughters, and mothers to sow seeds of discontent. As some female reformers urged fellow members to instill hatred of authority in their children, and this included teaching them the reformers' bad alphabet. Some examples include B is for Bible, bishop, and bigotry. K is for king, king's evil, and kidnapper. M is for majesty, mummery, massacre, and Manchester. After the massacre, between 18 and 20,000 local radicals held a protest meeting on Amberswood Common at High Hirons. A contingent of between 8 and 10,000, accompanied by at least 7 local female reform unions carrying captive liberty, marched from Wigan's marketplace. As Leigh's Henry Battersby was one of the 3 main speakers, it is highly probable that Leigh's female reformers were there. During the speeches, the Wigan Female Reformers presented a cap of liberty and their address was read. But such was the fear of violent attack by the military, the sight of a man on horseback wearing a forage cap spooked the crowd. Anticipating an attack by Sir Thomas Gerard and his troop of Ashton Yeomanry stationed in Wigan, some panicked. As many would have been Peterloo survivors, this was understandable. According to the Times, it was the ladies of the union who, by calling out, "Be firm, remain where you are," brought the fearful under control. So again, it was the women who kept their heads in a crisis and re-established order. And thank you. That's it. I'm sorry about I sometimes do have a soft voice.
It's okay, Yvonne. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, Yvonne.
So interesting. I think
ask a few questions. I just so if anyone has any questions at all around the Leigh Female Reformers, just please feel free to ask some questions now. Helen's got a few questions from us, which will keep us going, but you'll have just plenty of time to ask some more, because we'd like to hear from you what you'd like to know. Ask anything about terms you didn't understand or anything like that.
Yeah, there's a lot of information there. I think myself and Anna especially, we've been like absorbing excuse me, in the archives and in Yvonne's knowledge. So yeah, if there's anything that you want clarified or you're unsure about, then do ask those questions.
Yeah, there's
while we've got Yvonne. But yeah, Yvonne, amazing. Thank you so much for for doing that talk. I've got my first question was more about like working class women really in history, and I know this is something that you're particularly interested in your research, but just how too often they are misrepresented as victims or as powerless. I just wanted to ask, how important is it to uncover these stories and develop an understanding of these women, as you talk about that, like talking about the precursors to the female reform societies and these friendly societies, and how organised they were. Like, yeah, these were women with agency. How important is that?
Okay, well, I guess I've been researching the histories of Wigan's working class women for a while, as they organised themselves and their sisters to act independently and orchestrate political, trade union and economic change for a while now. And I've had them published in Paths Forward, and they've gone from here to I'm working on 1920s now. All the information I've got is from the archives, which is in Lee Town Hall, which is accessible to all. As I've researched these preoccupations, these ideas that women were powerless and that they were victims in a way, because they were poor, because they had to work hard, because they were the last probably in a line of considerations for people to look after them. I've been amazed how many of my preconceptions of women's place in Wigan's history has been wrong. You know, I've absorbed it, I've taken it in, I've believed it, and it's bunkum, to be honest.
I agree with you. Like, I feel the same way. I feel like that history is just there, isn't it? It's just accepted that and kind of similarly today, we kind of do a similar thing where we expect that, or we take for granted this idea that like middle class women or middle class people kind of speak for other people. Yeah, I think it's like an important lesson to learn, isn't it?
Well, I would think of as a child, you paid cowboys and Indians, we did, but without a whole load of Indians electing a chief, there wouldn't be a chief. So the working class women, in my mind, have been the base layer to advocate change, particularly with Thorley Smith, because it was the Wigan weavers that instigated that, one woman in particular, Helen Silcock, and they were approached by middle class women to set up the election fighting thing. So it is a misunderstanding, and it's understandable, because we were brought up believing subconsciously that women came second. Even if you look at old books, you very, very rarely see her and his. It's always his and hers. So we always prioritise the men, and you always assume that. Well, you're not consciously assuming it. You're absorbing it. So you think that the men came first, and the socialisation of me as a child now as growing up was pink for girls. Girls were good, girls were pretty, girls' weight stood at the back, girls were passive, where the boys were a pain, weren't they? Any boys there?
But I think also, Yvonne, it's like I think there's the whole thing of like it's been interesting that you've been able to you plough through the archives and you find the information, because I suppose working class women's history, working class people's history is why would that be kept?
A few questions actually on that subject, Helen. So we've got a question coming in from Marie, who asked, she assumes there's a lot of information in the archives, and is it easy to access them? I'm not sure if that's access the archives or access the information in the archives, but both of those questions. You can access the archives fairly easily normally, and you can access them from home as well, but obviously during lockdown you won't be able to go in. But Yvonne, you can answer the question about, is it easy to find this information in the archive? We also had a similar question from Joy, asking, where did you find the information about these women and how was it recorded?
Okay, right. First of all, you've got to, you have an idea of what's going on, and then you start to look at the period. Right, that's what I did, and I found, this is for Joy, that I found that the information from the town records, and I've got the thing, the township records of Wigan, Leigh and Atherton. They brought up the I'm looking for my list for a thing. If you can put image number 3 on, please, Anna.
Yeah.
This will explain. It will explain more. Okay. Now, in 1793, like I said, the reform, they were required to sign up and register as societies. Now, like I said, there's 84 of these in the archives, and they give up to 5 local women's names, and they explain. Oh, I'm getting lost here, so let's go back to my question. I'm sorry about this. Right, so how did I find out this information? How do you find out this information? If you want to research something and you go to the archives, there will not be a book about Wigan women, Wigan's working class women. You have to glean it from different sources, from sources like this, from sources like the newspapers, all the time after about 1850. Before that, all the bits and pieces of information come in piecemeal, and you record them, you think this is, and then you read your secondary sources, and then it comes back, and you think, well, that's right, but then you go on to another link that has been suggested. So it isn't straightforward in the archives. You do have to look through things. And the most interesting thing is to look through the 230-year-old documents to find the people's names. And there's all sorts you can find in there. But I found the fact that Henry Battersby had witnessed somebody. Now, when I first looked at that, I didn't register. And then I read about Henry Battersby as a radical reformer. And I'd also read about something about trade unions and how they started off often as friendly societies. And so everything comes together. But there's also huge gaps. There's an existence of the paperwork for the female reform unions in the rule book, but there's no names as to who compiled it. There's no hint of where it come from, apart from your own knowledge. If you know roughly how a committee works, how people put ideas together, how they build things, then you know that these ordinary women, they did all this. They may have had a professional in to type it all out, and make it all pretty. But yes, that's perfect. Yeah, they may have had that to do that, but they had to make decisions. They had to work it in. And that's how working class women's history comes through in the general. In the more specific, like these people here, if they were members of the radical women's thing is, you've got some names. And if you're doing family history as well, and one of your names may be on there, but these women, some of them could only mark with a cross, but and the names of the pubs and places, and that's how you find out about working class women's history. You do get the middle classes talking about the working classes or the lower orders, whatever. But they're talking about it's words. These are deeds, to coin a phrase. These are deeds, not words. This is what they did.
I think it's interesting when you talk about that, like layering of archive research, because I'm really new to archives, and it felt like that when we were in there, just that like you're finding these little sort of things and you're piecing together this puzzle, and there are those gaps in between that you've got to fill in. And I think, Yvonne, you were really good at filling in some of those gaps just in our knowledge of local history. So it is like having to identify something and then like work around it. And I think that's why it's interesting about the amicable societies and the friendly societies, to see that these women didn't just spring up. There was a context to that, and they were organised.
Do you want to ask another question, Helen, or do you want me to take one from the
I think it'd be nice to take one from the chat, because there's some interesting ones coming up.
So, I mean, we've got a question from Elaine Phipps, who's asking, will this inspire interpretation boards or an info trail around Wigan and Leigh?
I'm deaf now. Oh, sorry.
So, Elaine Phipps has asked, will this inspire interpretation boards or an info trail in Wigan and Leigh? She's shocked that it's not more widely known. Well, I'll just say that we have got a history walk coming up. So that's going to be one trail that you'll be able to go along on, hopefully at the end of this lockdown, potentially in the new year. But she's shocked that it isn't more widely known. I mean, there's so many histories that aren't widely known. There's so many stories. I mean, that's a kind of like point. But why do you think it isn't more widely known, Yvonne?
Well, it's local. It's only interesting to perhaps 100,000 people at the most, however many there are in Wigan, potentially. It's not interesting to people. It's not the big names. It's not the huge events of, say, a war or a new king coming to Parliament, or Brexit, or coronavirus. It's what happened here. But to me, it's more real, because it's people's experience. Every person's experience is talked about, and it's.
Well, that's a really lovely question.
I'm doing my best anyway. I'm doing my best. If you get passed forward, I'd put on.
I think it's interesting though. I think the idea though that it's like local and that only local people would be interested, I think is a bit of a misnomer, because it's like it may have happened locally, but it was affecting national politics. So like the wide ranging reach of it, and I think that's something that's interesting through what we've been doing, like engaging people throughout, like we've kind of had this wider reach on doing the banners, making the monster banners, and we've had people from like London and Hull and all sorts of different places around the country learning about this. And I think that's something that's like makes me feel good, that message is getting out, that history is getting out, because I think it is interesting history. It's just that it's not widely known.
And on top of that as well, like the reform movement as a whole was a nationwide movement, wasn't it? With rallies and things being held in Birmingham and in London and places like that. So it's kind of, it was it was a national movement. And I don't know where Henry Hunt came from, who came to do the speech, but was he not from the south?
He was from the south.
Yeah. It also just opens us up to Jeff's question as well, so I'll just add it in before you answer. So he just asked, was there similar societies nationwide, or was Lancashire a hot spot? I want to say hot pot there.
I was going to say that.
Was Lancashire a hot spot for reform groups? So were the societies like this nationwide, the friendly societies and the reform society, and was Lancashire a hot spot?
Well, Lancashire was a hub for working class radicalism, whether it be trade union or overtly radical meetings like Peterloo, or women weavers working for themselves, by themselves, with no mill and things. All sorts of things. We in Wigan put the very, very first women's suffrage candidate up for Parliament in 1906. And the people who did that were a group of Wigan weavers. They were did 12-hour days and in the mill, and they gathered as a very, well, it wasn't a very strong one initially, but it became very strong. And they're the ones that ran the very first, and people don't know, you know. The next one was it Bertrand Russell, and people think he was the first, but he wasn't. It was Wigan. Wigan's women put them up, you know, but nobody knows. Bertrand Russell is I think it was Bertrand Russell. I can't remember now, because I'm only here. Yeah, he's a household name. Yeah, and people who write history of the Fabian societies or whatever, they include him because he did a lot of good work. So he's well known. It's popularism. People, not everybody wants to be a historian, but some people want to read about history, and it's a good way of teaching, you know, to get the generalized big names from the top instead of from the bottom, where I believe it's from the bottom. Okay.
We've got another question from Catherine Long, who asked, how did someone's just gone off mute. How did the women share information and ideas, and did they have access to learning to read and write, and how did they teach each other?
Well, how did they access? Well, women and men at that time used to walk miles from town to town. If you had weavers, you'd be carrying the warp and the weft from one town to another, and going to a warehouse to sell it on. So you get the conversation there. So there's the incidental conversation there. You get families would go from Tilsley to live in, I don't know, Goulburn perhaps, I don't know, and they'd meet a couple of times a year, so things would pass on like that. They'd walk to meetings, and of course they did have meetings in, they say pubs, but it's not really pubs. They had meetings, the pubs at that time were the hub of the community. They just talk, and in the summertime, people used to congregate in town centres just to chat and talk. So it would come on in that, they'd find out in that way. And then there was the underground, as it were. They would make sure that each radical leader knew what the last one was doing. And there was the Manchester Observer, which was a radical newspaper. And like this Stewart fella, they'd go into a pub, all put a penny in every week and get the paper, and they'd share the paper and people would read it. So that they were quite, on the face of it, it would seem that they were very isolated. But they weren't. They weren't really. And of course the canal was there by then, you know, so they could walk along the canal bank. My daughter can do it in a few hours, you know, or even less, you know.
Yvonne, in terms of like literacy, in terms of like literacy, were the weavers literate? Were they like educated, and or did they learn how to?
It's difficult to know, but I do know that Leigh had a lot of small schools, plenty. I was surprised at how many schools there were in Leigh. Now, whether they were James Street or not, I don't know. They did focus at first on reading, rather than reading and writing. That's what I've garnered from the secondary resources. The schools in Leigh have left no records of that time. So we don't really know. We're just believing what we're told in published histories. And the logic of, well, if they're going to work at 8 years old and they're working 10, 12, they're not going to have the time to learn. But all that is assumption. We don't know until somebody gives us until somebody gives us a parcel of papers from 200 years ago that includes a record book of some sort. We don't know. We can assume using the logic.
Yeah, and I suppose like religion plays a part in that a little bit as well. Like people would read the Bible, So there may be sort of like education around that kind of.
Well, that was a double-edged sword, because the C of E was Tory, high Tory. It was most of their lessons would be to bolster up the status quo. Methodism may be different, but that was just, that was different again. So yes, I agree, but it's what they're being taught. Sorry.
Do you want to bring someone about other questions, Helen, or shall I?
I'm just going to ask a question about the cap of liberty. Just you recount how the magistrate Ralph Fletcher identified the female reformers as a serious threat, and they mentioned their presentation of the cap of liberty. Like, what significance did the banner and the banners and cap of liberty play in these meetings?
And why was it threatening as well? Why was it considered threatening?
Yeah.
It was hugely significant. Absolutely hugely significant. The cap of liberty originated in Roman times, when it was presented by Romans to freed slaves. So they wore the cap, and it was given to them to show that they were free people. Okay, and thereafter it became a symbol of liberty. The cap of liberty. You are free. If I could have image number 6, please. Right, number 6. There she is. That's Britannia, the Roman name for England. That's somebody. Even now, we think Britannia rules the waves. Britannia was a very important persona that personified liberty and freedom. And there she was. Before the French Wars, she was often depicted with, would you believe, a cap of liberty on a spear, a spearhead. Where are we? Britannia was the ancient. Can we have number 7? Now, please, image number 7. But go on. I'm a bit disjointed, but I think the image says it all, really. Before 1790s, the coins had a cap of had a liberty spear. Britannia was holding it, a liberty spear. Now, after the French Revolution, they changed that spearhead to a trident. And I didn't know. And when you look at any of our old pennies, it's a trident on there. And that was because it had become devalued. It became a threat to wave a liberty flag, or a cap of liberty, or a spear to the status quo, to the British Constitution, because in 1776 the Americans had used the cap of liberty on a spear as their symbol, as their emblem, and as we know, they threw the British out. And then you've got the 1790s, 80s and 90s in France, where it was their emblem of liberty, and they were threatening Britain. So if you go back to number 5, there you'll see Napoleon holding a liberty cap on a spear. So it became, from being a symbol of liberty that Britain was proud of, that she liked to identify as libertarian, it became a threat, a threat to their way of life, the establishment. And of course, during the terror, and during the French Revolution between 1793 and 74, that year, you know the ladies that sat on the bottom of the guillotine, knitting away. Well, they were knitting, apparently, the red liberty caps. So you've got the aristocracy being guillotined, and underneath you've got the working classes knitting and making caps of liberty. So it became a real threat. It became not overt, a not so subtle way of saying, "This is you next time. This is you." You know. So the British took offence. Okay. Anything else?
That's brilliant. So we've got a question from Nazia. So thank you. She says that we've done a nice event, and she asked, why hasn't this tradition and character kept alive since then? Because we have many different issues, but we need strong women who can be passionate, strong role models for our younger generations. I mean, I would suggest, Nazia, that you are one of those strong women, and we've got many of them on this who've come along today to talk with or to enjoy this talk as well. So I don't think the tradition is not completely alive. But
so yeah. Why is it not? Sorry.
So yeah, so why do you think the tradition and character hasn't kept alive?
Why hasn't it been kept alive? Well, it has, but women's history is hidden. It isn't always talked about. It isn't, how shall I say, why isn't it used as a thing? I really don't know, to be honest. I can only guess that it wasn't considered important enough for the historians to write about. Why?
Sorry.
I'm sorry, why haven't we heard of it? Because we've been taught the traditional historical message that history is about big events, about the worthies, the great and the good. When I was at school, I know I'm old, I keep saying that, we didn't do that. Now with third waves of feminism, but now that women are taking centre stage as a right, not as a favour, and they're not stealing it, they're not taking it, they're not being given it, they're just there. Perhaps we'll hear more of this. It's up to people like me. It's up to every person who has a little bit of influence, to any boy or girl, to say, whoa, it's equal, or this is, women have always been active. It's just that it wasn't written about it. We weren't taught it, and now you can see, we're taking over more. And that's not to say that men were being horrid and this and the other, because they were socialised along the same way as well. So that's the only reason I can think of.
I think you make a really good point. I think it's like being able to, this is one thing that me and Anna was saying, it's like being able to see those histories and hear about those histories, then it just gives you a more honest view of what was happening and what can happen, and what, if you can see it, then you can be it, kind of thing.
And it's like me when I started researching, and I was amazed that I was wrong, because you need to see strong role models, but not aggressively strong role models, just as the norm, that people do sit on committees with males and females, and that's just the way it is. People do go into a restaurant as a female alone and eat, in the 70s, 80s and even 90s. That wasn't really quite the thing to do. It's just normalising the fact that we are people first, and that's how I see it. So I'm sorry, any more?
I've just got another question from Gabrielle that I thought was suitable on that. So she asked, would the press have suppressed the information about the women's activism then?
They would have distorted it, because often they were part of the establishment. If they were radical, they'd be open to all sorts of legal fines and persecutions. They had their owners were part of the establishment. You did get the radical press that did inform people, but then you have to be careful what they say as well, because they were biased as well. So they went up and I have a quote from that, and I can't remember where it is, but it was to say, we'll move on. So why didn't they hear about it in the press? After Peterloo, the Times and a few more took the horrors of it on board, and they started to publicise it more. But then you have what they call a 6 Acts that was brought in November 1819, and they introduced the idea of seditious libel, treasonable acts that were very, very, very flexible. They weren't written down. It was whoever was in authority at the time decided that that was seditious. Then they could arrest the person, whoever elevated or whatever, and put them in prison and prosecute them. They could banish them to another country. They could transport them. And if they were poor, there was very little comeback as to defending them. And Henry Hunt and people like that were put in prison. So it was a dangerous thing to do, to support the radicals. And you mustn't forget the psyche of the newspaper reporters and people like that. They were frightened. They're frightened that we'd have a revolution. You know, we mustn't lose sight of that it would have been horrendous if we'd have had an English resolution. So it's not black and white, you know.
I think it's interesting as well about the way that they were, the information that was coming out about the women's activism in the press, that the very little, obviously, I mean, me and Helen have been trying to research this, and we've come across references. We went to the Manchester City Library archives, and we find that they were like, even in those newspapers, when events happened, it would say a crowd of men and children. Yeah. It wouldn't even use the word woman, like ever, like every single report we were kind of going through, not just about even the radicals, just general news. Women just weren't mentioned at all. It was like they did not exist, which I thought was really...
use of the generic term male.
Yeah, so
workers,
a crowd of men and children, and a crowd of, or men and families might be used, but
men and families, yeah,
never men and women or a crowd.
Part of it, yeah. The women weren't. They were subsumed within the generic terms mainly. And the papers were looking for aggressive, fighting actions, so they were looking for the men. The women have always been brought up to be supportive of the male rather than independent agents of their own thing. So they were of their time, you know, and it's awfully difficult to read now. And it isn't right. But I'm just trying to find something now. So keep talking.
Yeah, in the chat, Harriet Monkhouse has said the male embraces the female in quotes. I think that really sums up what you're saying, Yvonne.
All right. I'll talk about the dresses because I'm a lady, you see. So no, it's not true. No. I was saying about how women turned. I was listening to Mary Beardsmore, and how women use things or items or views or impressions of women that have been used to suppress them or to oppress them, and or to uphold a patriarchal view of what women should be. And the white dresses of the Peterloo female reformers, as you see, can we have image number 1 again, if it's quick? If it's not,
yeah.
No. Next one down. There you are. Now you have Peterloo, the massacre itself, and the ladies in the white dresses. Now, white was a symbol of innocence, of purity, and shrinking violets, and the little girl that's passive and quiet. And of course, these women were not passive little girls. They were not innocent. I don't mean in sexuality. I mean they were worldly wise. They were assertive, and they were proud of their white dresses. Now, they did not just decide, well, I'll put the white frock on today. That would have been a planned decision to put white dresses on, because the women in Leigh wore white dresses with black sashes. It was a symbol. It was a uniform, if you will. It was telling, subconsciously telling people that you may look innocent, but we're not. You know, we are strong. We're playing you. You know, you look at us and you think, oh, you know, but we're not. We're strong. Now, can I have image number?
Can I just interrupt you there, Yvonne? Because I think it's a really important point that you make. And I think it's something that's come into mine and Anna's like conversations about our work as well, and about this project. And it's this idea of like, of what the women did, like what they did to project an image to be accepted. So like Ruth Mather, the historian that we used her essay as a starting point, she calls the reformers shapeshifters, that they were presenting an image, but their actions were very like contrary to that image. So it's like what you're saying there, isn't it? Like these symbols were really important to almost get people on side with those like sort of traditional conformist views of what women should be.
Yes, you said that better than I did. But yes, it is. And it's deeds, not words. It wasn't in the books that they were strong and this, that, and the other, but in their dresses, there was a mismatch between their actions and what people assumed. And then if we go back to image number 10, please, or on to number 10. You have the white dress. And who do you have wearing that white dress? You have Christobel Pankhurst, still doing the same thing, playing the femininity card, playing on men's, not all men, certain people's presumptions that, you know, she's weak in this and the other, but she's not. She's very strong. And so she wore dresses. And if you think about the processions of the women's suffrage campaign 100 years after Peterloo, you get the hundreds and hundreds of women wearing white dresses, carrying banners, proclaiming their political message, doing exactly the same. Now, I don't think for 1 minute that was accidental. I think that was a continuation from 1819 all the way through, and it was tapped into that. And then if you move on to number 12, no, that's the one. It's a very poor image, but there you have the Wigan's weavers in July 1914 as they walked from Marketplace to Westwood Grounds. It was a Labour demonstration, but the main speaker was Mary MacArthur, who was a trade union member who fought for women's rights. It was the Wigan's women there who put up the candidate, the first women's suffrage candidate. It was in there was the the National Society, the women's suffrage speakers and organisers, and the girls are dressed in white. So that, again, it's a continuation of the message that I'm in white. Perhaps some of it was, oh, I will wear the white dress, but it was planned in the Weavers' minute books in the archives. That banner is discussed, and that banner is put under a team of organisers who planned it. It wasn't accidental, like the Sunday walk, the walking days. It wasn't accidental. They were making a statement, and it was a continuation from then.
Yvonne,
yeah.
just while this image is up, There was something, while this image is up, there was something that you mentioned to us when we were working in the archive about the position of women around the banner.
I'm sorry, can't hear.
Sorry, I know there's a bit. Is the sound all right?
I think there's a lot of delay.
Yeah, I'm struggling with that. If you can hear me, Yvonne, I'm just saying, like, the position of the women around the banner, like,
Yes.
that was significant, wasn't it? Do you remember what you?
Sorry, I'm checking the sound.
There was, well, I'll kind of go into it, because there was something that I'm sure you mentioned to us, Yvonne, at the time about the women were positioned around the banners because the banners were such precious and such precious symbols.
Yes. It was the banner obviously was a symbol of unity. Wigan weavers were unified. They were strong. I mean, that's trade unionism. They united we stand and things like that. And that's all I can think of right at the moment.
Yeah, I'm a bit, I think there was something about around the time of Peterloo that the banners were such important kind of items that the women were around the banners to protect them, like almost like, I don't know whether we heard it from somewhere else, but just that, like, there was less of a chance that the women would get attacked. This was obviously pre-Peterloo, and that they would flank the banners to protect them.
Yeah.
Which I thought was
I do know after Peterloo, the authorities moved heaven and earth to destroy everything that was available, that was left. And there were certain things saved, like the Wigan Reform Union's Cap of Liberty. That was on display during the Chartist demonstrations on Amberwood Common in the 1840s.
Wow.
So it had been saved from then, but they did bend to destroy everything. But as well as that being the white dresses, the innocence, the strength in numbers, the political message it puts across: we are women, we are together, we are this, that and the other. There was also the absolutely horrendous images, as your monsters are all about. And if you go back one to number 11, I'm going quiet again, aren't I? Number 11, image number 11. It's all right, it's unstable. There we are. Anyway, they're your monsters, Helen and Anna. And that was a postcard sent to Christobel Pankhurst in 1909 by the Anti-Suffrage Society. So it wasn't just the power of the women to assert themselves as equals, not superior, but equals. It was also the continuity of the people who did not want that and who presented them as witches and horrendous people. And I don't know if I'm supposed to say this, but last week when Johnny Depp's trial was on, the charity Fathers for Us drove past a lorry with a big digital screen, and it said "Ditch the Witch" on it. And even worse, one of the emails to one of his friends from Johnny, and I shouldn't say it because I might be putting your thing at risk, but that he talked about doing things like well, I'll tell the history. In 1716 or thereabouts, if somebody was suspected of being a witch, they would duck them. So and if they drowned, they weren't a witch. But if they didn't drown, then they'd burn them. a similar sort of email was talked about. With, anyway, let's move on before that.
It's a horrific violence. I think we should ask Nicola's question.
But Helen, I think we should whiz through these ones really quickly because we're just coming over time.
Yeah.
The signal's gone a bit odd. So I don't know if other people are having the same trouble that I am in terms of the sound.
Do you want me to, if you can hear me all right, I can ask Nicola's question. So one of the things, this is Nicola Cummins, one of the things that became apparent from Peterloo was the level at risk the reformers put themselves at in gathering and forming in groups and their involvement in activism. So Yvonne, did you find out any interesting things that the Leigh women did to conceal what they were doing, or were they openly activist and challenging the authorities based on?
Well, I can only go on evidence, and I've no evidence of anything like that, one way or the other. You can assume, and because it happened there, it probably did happen. But personally, I haven't yet. I've not finished yet. The
keep
township
looking.
records.
Yeah, keep looking.
Just still there, waiting for me.
But then there's those like little nuggets in the newspaper, like the pike making.
Yeah. Yes. Now the pipe making. Well, that's very interesting because I have got some official evidence when I found out a piece of paper about them. After Peterloo, or about the time of Peterloo, they had the government put in something called a Watch and Ward Act, where people, the authorities could watch certain people, certain radicals, to see what would happen, what was happening, and they could send for troops to look after, to protect the town. Well, we've got Richard Marsh, who was the magistrate, and he wrote to the Home Secretary to ask for support for troops to support Leigh, to look after the people of Leigh. And he sent some oaths, and they were anonymous reports of from informers about weapon making. Now, these seemed to be really, really sturdy weapons they were making. And it said they were made by blacksmiths. So they wouldn't be, I thought they would be improvised, and they probably were improvised by people, but they were also, according to Marsh, now he could have been exaggerating to get his troops, I don't know, but he said a blacksmith at Pickley Green in Leigh was making pikes, and they'd hired a man to file them all. And another one had been given orders for 20 pikes, and he refused, but he could have been asked to make 100. And another man swore that he made 18 to 20 various instruments with points and keels fastened to staffs, and he could have had orders for 1,000. But Robert Poole, you know Robert Poole, yeah, he points out that these were treasonable offences, and Marsh ought to have arrested them and prosecuted them, but he didn't. So there's some speculation here by me. I said the oaths may have been manufactured to add weight to his request for troops. Spies were paid, and many in Leigh was starving. The oaths could have been bought, yeah, or they could have been given under duress. Then again, Leigh radicals could have been planning an insurrection. We don't really know until we find evidence, and you can't say. You can assume as long as you're making your own speculating, and the possibilities are there, you know, because we've seen.
And there was the later
Leigh pike, haven't we?
Mm-hmm. There was a later pike in the Chartist.
Yeah.
But then I think Hannah from the archives said that there was some speculation even still whether or not that pike definitely was at the meeting. I think even its provenance isn't totally
That's right.
down.
Yeah, sorry. They're not going to write down, oh, and this pike here, well, Tony Blair from up the road, he carried it through, and they're not writing that down, are they? The articles and items, to a certain extent, they tell a story. The length of that, you can tell that the man who used it was fairly safe, you know. But the rest is speculation. Right, anything else?
Yeah, I've just got a question
List of, what's it
earlier from HS. I don't know who this is, but is there a link between these groups and the women? And
between what group?
I'm assuming it must be the Reformers and the Friendly Societies with the Co-op Women's Guild.
Oh, yes, that was in the early 20th century. There was a lot of support, mutual support for them, and in fact they and we're doing some work on there. Pardon? I'm doing.
Is that like 100 years later though than these women?
It is, because the co-op movement didn't start till the 1840s.
Yeah.
But that's it. I'm just work on the First World War and on soldiers and sailors. Again, women, the wives of soldiers and sailors, and the Cooperative Women's Guild were very involved. But as for now, I can't get into Manchester Cooperative Archives where they have the minute books for Wigan at that time, but I can't read them. But when the lockdown has gone, you know, I can get on the V1 and I'm on my way.
All right, I've just had it revealed to me.
I'm sorry?
I think HS may be Hillary.
Anything else?
Yeah. So we just got a comment from Helen Stark.
They met in pubs.
Oh, has it gone frozen?
Why have I heard that name?
Helen Stark is
Anyway, it doesn't matter.
she runs the Turnpike. So she's, I think that my sound's gone really terrible.
I've heard her name. I can't hear you.
Can you hear me okay now?
I can.
So she's saying it's interesting how the image of the women in the white dress wearing a cap of liberty evolved to become the angel of socialism in the 19th.
With the white, they didn't wear the cap of liberty. They were on poles, the cap of liberty. They wore the white dress.
Right, yeah, but she's suggesting that it evolved into the angel of socialism. You know, the imagery that you get in Walter Crane's woodcuts or whatever they were.
I haven't seen them yet, but I will go straight on the internet after and have a look.
I think that's also it's also represented on quite a lot of early of Labour posters and stuff. This kind of angel of socialism. It's like another mythical woman.
Oh,
like
I've just missed that, but I won't miss it. Yeah. Brilliant. Anything else?
I think we're kind of nearing the end now, aren't we, Anna? Is there anything that you want to ask? Any of the questions that we've got?
Oops. Yeah. There's just, well, I'll just ask one more because I just think it's kind of interesting. But do you have you come across any specific evidence, Yvonne, of where the women genuinely met in Leigh? So any of their meeting places, any names of meeting places, or any kind of locations that the reform meetings would have taken place in? Not the parade style meetings, but the more like the organisational meetings. Oh, have we lost Yvonne?
I think we might have. Yeah, go on. Are we? No.
Oh, I think she's gone.
No.
Oh, well, at least it was coming towards the end anyway. Is she gone?
I don't know if
She's
she's
still there,
gone.
She's still there, but I can't.
She is there, yes. Yvonne, let's just unmute you.
Thanks everybody for putting up with the difficulty with the technology.
Anna, can you unmute Yvonne?
I just tried to, but I just had to ask her to unmute. Oops. I've just muted her now. I just think I've just muted her again. Because I asked her to unmute too many times.
You're back. Oh no, you're not back.
Yvonne,
Okay.
can you unmute?
Right.
Should we do
If,
Unmute.
yeah.
Can you hear me?
Oh, yeah.
No, it was unmute.
Just in the nick of time, Yvonne.
You got me. Right, again. It's because if you make the link with friendly societies, especially Henry Battersby, who was the radical leader in Leigh, that he did meet with the friendly societies in the Cochin in Leigh, you can make an informed assumption, but it isn't hard, fast. It doesn't say Henry Battersby, the reform leader, met regularly, but he did witness the stewards as he signed those ladies in, and that that was the Amicable. But it is a very highly probable, but I've no hard evidence as yet. I've evidence that he was involved with the Amicable, but that's all. But I'll keep looking. I shall have a look at all those things. If anybody's a family historian and they've got that far back, those certificates in the archives may be very valuable to you, because they do. There's at least, like I say, 5 names, mainly females, and a couple of males. Anyway, that's just me going off at a time. That's it.
Make sure that you, if you do find any information about any seditious meetings, Yvonne, just get on the blower to us straight away.
We might be.
Your email.
Okay. Should we wrap up, Helen?
We'll wrap up now. So thanks for everybody for coming, and thank you so much, Yvonne, for giving us such an amazing talk and just such interesting conversation and discussion about like such an important part of Leigh history, but also it is part of national history, and it's connecting us with those women and their actions. So yeah, thank you so much, Yvonne, and thanks for being part of our project, full stop, because it has been really invaluable to have you there. And then just to let you know that we have we've got another talk coming up. Can you still hear me?
Yeah.
Sorry, I keep
Thank
seeing
you very much for asking me.
freezing things.
Yeah.
Okay, so we have another talk coming up at the end of the month, which is going to be on Saturday the 28th of November. And that's with another historian called Ruth Mather, who is no relation to me, and I've never met her before, so I'm really excited about this talk. But her essay about female reform was the initial spark for mine and Anna's starting this project. So we'll be putting that together this week. We'll be putting an Eventbrite link together and hopefully sending that out as soon as possible. So I hope you can make it to that. Hope to see you again at that.
You have any further questions, obviously, that didn't get answered today, or there's like slightly different take on the Leigh Female Reformers, so additional information, this is an epic subject, so there'll be lots of new things to learn about in that one too.
Yeah, and just like we're not in the Turnpike obviously at the minute, in lockdown. We've come out of there, but we will be continuing to do things online and to update you with bits and pieces. So if I think probably everybody is maybe on a mailing list, but if you're not, you can get in touch with us, maybe in the chat, maybe not. we will find a way to contact you. But yeah, we'll get that message out there as to what we're doing throughout this period. But yeah, so thank you very much.
Yes, thank you so much, and have a nice rest of your Saturdays.
Yeah, bye.
Bye. Oh, thank you. Bye.